Hello, this is Chris Schmidt from Rocket Lasso, and I would just like to say a big thank you from Danny, Johnny, and I to you for purchasing our very first plugin, Recall. Now, presumably, you've already purchased, downloaded, unzipped, gone inside the Recall Rocket Lasso version 1.0 zip folder, and are currently watching this install video. Firstly, let's go over how to install this on PC, and immediately after, I will talk about how to install on the Mac. Now, this is very important. There are two copies of Recall. Both versions are inside the same zip. If you're on a Mac or PC, you're going to install the top Recall folder, unless you are on the Mac operating system and you are using Catalina or beyond, in which case use the Recall Catalina folder. Otherwise, use the regular Recall. Here we are on PC, so inside of Cinema 4D, and in this case, Cinema 4D S22, although this should work in R18 and beyond. In either case, there are two ways to install, and both of those ways are from inside the Edit Preferences folder. So you want to open whatever version of Cinema we're going to be installing in, pop open your preference folder, and we've got two different ways to do this. First of all, we can say Open Preferences folder, in which case it will open your Cinema 4D Preferences folder. This is where you've probably installed a bunch of plugins or possibly library items. So inside this folder that popped open for you, you can find a Plugins folder, and this is where you want to copy your copy of Recall. So inside the original zip, I could drag and drop. So drag Recall over or hold down Control to make sure it is copying over. Make a copy of that, moving on over into this plugin folder, and that should work just fine. You could close down Cinema 4D, restart it, and then your Recall should show up right away. An alternative way would be, let's delete this. An alternative would be putting this Recall folder anywhere that you want to keep your plugin. So in this case, I could copy that, travel to, this is not a proper good workflow, but I'm going to go to the desktop. On the desktop, paste that in, and now there's a Recall folder on the front. So now that that has happened, I've got it somewhere on a drive, wherever that is going to live. I can travel back into Cinema 4D, go to the Preferences window again, under Plugins, click Add Folder, and track down that copy of Recall wherever it might live. Now, currently, this goes automatically to the desktop, and I can immediately see Recall. So clicking on the word Recall there, hitting OK, we'll now see a direct path to that Recall folder, and now that should also work. In any case, you have to restart Cinema 4D to get it to show up. So let's do that. Once Cinema opens again, close the Quick Start dialog, create any object that you like, let's say a cube in this case. And to find Recall, it's not in the plugin or extensions menu. It's actually found by right-clicking on an object and finding Recall here, probably near the bottom. Now, if you're in 18 or 19, then there's a chance that this will live inside of a folder, probably near the render tags, and it will be in a flyout from there. So keep an eye out for that. The way Recall works in the most basic way is you can click on the Recall tag. It'll create an empty Recall tag. Clicking the Store button will store the current state of this object and all of its children. And then if you make any changes to it, say in this case, make it editable, if you click on the tag and click Recall, it'll bring it back to the state that it was stored originally. Now, if you're brand new to Recall, a quick hint before you go and check out more information, you can right click, add the Recall tag, and instead of storing it by clicking the Recall or the Store button, you can double click and that will create a store state. Now we can make changes to the object, hit T for scale on the cube, shrink it way down. And then because we already stored something and you can see the Recall icon on there now, if I were to double click, it'll recall it back to the state in which it was stored. So without ever going into the interface, we can actually store and recall very, very quickly. Make sure you go and check out the full Quick Start video to get lots of details and use cases and find out what all the different buttons do inside of Recall. But once again, thank you very much for purchasing, and I'll see you in the other tutorials. Here we are on the Mac. Now, presumably you've purchased, downloaded, unzipped, and gone inside the Recall folder and are currently watching this video. As stated earlier, there are two different copies of Recall. There is the regular folder here for Mac and PC, and that's one you want to use unless you are on specifically the Mac OS Catalina or beyond, the newest versions. And if you're in those newer versions, you need to install this version because there are security features that the older stuff won't work anymore. So we have to make a special copy just for newer Macs. Now, as stated on the PC version, there are two different places we might install this. First of all, we can copy this folder someplace, let's say copy it, right click, copy it, and then travel to any place you want, your desktop, drive somewhere, someplace on your Dropbox. You can travel to that folder. For me, I'm going to go to plugins local, right click, and paste that somewhere on the hard drive now. So that now lives on the hard drive. Going into Cinema 4D S22, the version I'm actively working on, I should be able to go to Edit, Preferences, and there's two different ways of installing this. Now, we just copied that somewhere locally on the drive, so I can go to the Plugins tab, click on Add Folder, and that will travel somewhere in your hard drive. I'm going to say Plugins Local, and then select Recall Catalina. Say Open, and it is now seeing that file. So that's fine. If I restarted Cinema, that should show up. As an alternative, I will delete that. So that would work. As an alternative, though, I can click the Open Preferences, find that active version of Cinema that you're using, and inside here, there will be a plugins folder. Inside there, you can also paste your version of Recall. In this case, Catalina. If you're in pre-Catalina, make sure you use the other one or it will not work. So now that that is installed one way or the other, we should be able to close down Cinema 4D and restart it. Wait for Cinema to reopen, close the Quick Start dialog, create an object, any object. I'll start with a sphere. Right click on the sphere, and we should see at the bottom of the interface, Recall. Now, possibly you have other plugins. It's going to be somewhere near the bottom. If you're in an older version of Cinema, it's possible it might be in a flyout menu, probably above or below render tags in a Recall folder, and you'd see it inside there. But in our case, here's a Recall sitting, waiting for us. So clicking on that, we should see an empty Recall tag up here. I can click the Store button on it, and it will store the properties of this object and all of its children. In this case, I can now make this editable, go to something like polygons, do a loop selection, D for extrude. So now we've made changes. Clicking on the Recall tag, I can click the Recall, and it will jump it back to the state when it was stored. If you're new to Recall, there's a even faster workflow, which is creating a new Recall tag, and you can just double click. If it's empty, double clicking will store the state. Now we could change anything about this we want. We could drop the segment count, make it editable, give it children, anything we want. And at any point, I can double click on a tag that's full, and it will recall it back to the state when it was stored. Once again, thank you very much for picking up Recall for Cinema 4D, Rocket Lasso's very first plugin. I'm very excited to see what everybody does with it, and I'll see you in the help videos. Bye-bye.